but it would be good to understand exactly the balance that's attempted to be struck there. And the clause, just before I run out of time, the clause there is 25(2), where that is mentioned. So if the Minister could give us a bit of help with that, that would be appreciated.
Mr. Chair. I call the Honourable David Parker.
Mr. Chairman, in this part I'm looking most forward to the contribution from the ACT Party, because the ACT Party have got more experience in assumed identities than any other party in this House. And I well remember David Garrett having railed against name suppression and discharges without conviction, was exposed for his hypocrisy for having had both. Actually, with the assistance of Garth McVicker from the Sensible Censoring Trust, which is not a tag that most people would attach to his views. But David Garrett assumed the identity of dead babies. When he was eventually found out, he said that he was modelling his behaviour on the Day of the Jackal. Interestingly, the real person who lies behind the Day of the Jackal is in court again, I think, at the moment in Paris, isn't he, for his involvement in murders back in the 1970s. Anyway, David Garrett, he was one of the people who took the ACT Party from sort of a number of members down to one. They're largely a political irrelevancy that survives as some sort of vestige, a bit like a tail that you didn't no longer need, that the National Party rely upon for one vote. So I'm looking forward to hearing from David Seymour, and maybe, you know, I've actually decided if that's his real name, David Seymour. That's right. I actually have the privilege of standing against him in the general election this year in the Epsom electorate. So I'm hoping that he's going to take a call here, and if he doesn't, I think I might have to raise it on the hustings. Sir, can I mention a more serious matter, sir, which is, you know, this is actually another area in this part of the bill where the government, because they've been willing to listen to the Select Committee and to engage with the opposition, have got to a good outcome. And the rule made around the requirement to keep a register of assumed identities that is available for scrutiny by the Inspector General and the Minister, but particularly the Inspector General, is a very good outcome. Can I say, Mr Attorney, that one of the reasons why I'm so pleased that the House has got agreement largely across the House on this legislation is actually the protection of public confidence in democracy. And I think that in New Zealand, we really ought to be taking a bow on this compared with what's happening in other countries where the polemic of debate in democracies has become so extreme that everyone's taking extreme whacks at each other, whether it's the Republicans against the Democrats or Trump against the media, or what's happening in Australia where their debates are becoming very polarised. It's actually undermining public confidence in the very institutions that protect democracy. And, sir, I think that we can be thankful that through the more measured approach that we take in this Parliament, with the major parties and other parties supporting it as well, and also a slightly less polarised media debate than we have from some of the awful websites that are spreading fake news and the likes of in America, we're actually managing to maintain public confidence in our democratic institutions. And as someone who believes very strongly in the importance of democracy, because it's so much better than autocracy or theocracy or other forms of totalitarianism, I really believe that we are doing a service to our people, trying to find the appropriate balance between powers of the state and protections of the rights of privacy of citizens against excessive state intrusion. And through this bill, which, as I've said previously, I think it's actually probably certainly better than our current laws, and I suspect it's probably amongst the best oversight legislation of spy agencies in the world, we're actually showing that our democracy can work to protect the interests of the people, and therefore we maintain greater confidence in democracy. People are more likely to vote. they're more likely to participate in civil society, they're less likely to throw things at each other, they're more likely to respect laws, they're more likely to respect the property rights of others, and they're more likely to try and reach out to each other across the centre in order to reach the compromises that we need to in society in order to run a prosperous and fair society, sir. So, sir, with that, I think that's all I need to say on this Part 3 of the bill, and it has the Labour Party's support, and I agree that the changes made to Clause 45 are appropriate.
Mr Chair.
Dennis O'Rourke.